Jam on toast, him and those puke, fried cutlet, patties, nuggets, offal miso soup, meat only curry, meatballs, sushi, steak, sashimi, hot pot, meat buns, mystery meat hot pot, extreme juice, hair? Denji eats a lot of weird stuff, and although you may chalk this all up to Chainsaw Man's weirdness, and some weird vor fetish on Fujimoto's part, I think there's a lot of reason to believe that food is an incredibly symbolic and important part of Chainsaw Man that is still being explored even up until the latest chapters of the manga, as well. This might blow your mind, but falling as a chef. So if you want to know what I mean by all this, then keep watching the video. So if you find yourself entertained at any point during the video, consider liking, subscribing and ringing that bell, as I cannot explain to you how much just a small action can do for this channel. If you want to support this channel even further, then perhaps check out my Patreon. Anyway, on with the video. Food is everywhere in Chainsaw Man because food is one of the things most relevant to the series' protagonist, Denji. And a lot of this stems from the value he places in food, or more largely, Denji's view on life and how one should live it. Denji, as we all know, grew up in poverty. It's often understated in fact how bad his childhood was. Not only was he pushed to the point he killed his own father, but he then lived as a dog to the Yakuza, barely surviving on the scraps that he could afford, from risking his life fighting devils. Of course, he's not the only character with a tragic childhood. Aki, for example, had his entire family wiped out before his eyes, an incident that led him to set off down a blood-stained quest for revenge that could only realistically end with his death. But the key difference between these two childhoods is that Aki latched onto something bigger than himself, an impossible dream. His revenge was what kept him going. He used his hate as a crutch to ease his heart. He couldn't be overtaken by sorrow if he instead converted it all to hate. Denji though didn't do this. He did the opposite. He latched onto the most basic of things, of shelter, of food. Denji didn't have grand aspirations, something which made him happier than Aki despite their similar situations. He took pleasure in the little things. He even thought wanting more was too selfish, that he should be content with his life with Vegeta. A life, I remind you, is abject hell. This to me gives Denji a unique outlook on life compared to the rest of the cast. Now, I'm not saying he is some minimalist or anything like that. More that he holds those things we take for granted with the importance they deserve. We take for granted that we have food, shelter and water, as without them we would live miserable lives. Of course, since we aren't without, it's kinda hard for us to understand. And that's why characters look down on Denji and his way of living. Aki being a glaring example, as they either can't relate to a situation or have been in a similar one and latched onto something bigger in order to get through it. Food is symbolic of life. If you don't eat, you die. Food is what allows you to live. It's why Denji was so fixated on food, because without it, you literally don't have a life. But it's also, on a grander scale, symbolic of the meaningful things in life. Or more specifically, food is what Denji places value in. I mean, remember, what was his first dream in the series? To eat toast with jam. Denji, whether he knows it or not, just wants to live a normal life. I mean, look at the scene where he tells Vegeta what his dreams are. To eat good food, to have a girlfriend, to play games. These aren't big dreams to most people, they are just normal. But Denji again doesn't see it this way. He sees normal as incredible, saying that, and this is why he is so easily taken advantage of, why he is obedient to Makima, which I explore thoroughly in this video here. As what does she offer him when they first meet? Food. She tells him about a breakfast, what she specifically calls a normal breakfast. But to Denji, it is above his wildest imaginations, it's what he sees as incredible. The normal meal, the food any normal person would eat. In other words, a normal life. It's amazing to him. When Makima mentions breakfast, we see Denji look between two things, between the pile of corpses around him and Makima. This to me is him contemplating life, going with Makima to eat and live, or staying in poverty and dying, joining that pile of corpses. And so as always he pursues life. He killed his father to keep living, he became a devil hunter to keep living, and he goes with Makima to keep living. This being symbolised by her offer being one of food, as to accept food, to eat, is to keep living. When she feeds him soggy udon, he is overjoyed. She treats him to subpar food, again what any normal person would eat, but to him it's glorious, and so he can be controlled by her. Like how he sees food as more incredible than it really is, he sees Makima as far more incredible than she really is. He sees her as his saviour. Even when he kills her, he still loves her. And why does he love her so much? Because she made his dream come true. She gave him the dream life he wanted. But to us on the outside, it's just tragic, as it's not a dream life at all. It's like what Reze says to him when he says how amazing his life is with public safety. Isn't that just a normal life? No, normally you don't have to risk your life fighting devils to eat, drink and sleep under a roof. Now, although this does paint Denji as a very ignorant and stupid person, I do think this is also commendable of him. It's quite inspiring to see someone take such value from something as simple as a meal. It's why so many people relate to Denji so much, because he is a simple man who appreciates what he has. But you can't stay ignorant forever, as I explore in this video here. Ignorance and knowledge are two of the most core themes to Chainsaw Man as a series, and as the series goes on, Denji fights between being ignorant and knowledgeable. He chooses ignorance after Aki's death and ends up as a dog in spirit to Makima, but then with Power's love he regains knowledge and fights back to kill Makima. And this is why him eating her is so poetically beautiful. She tricked him, she made him think she was amazing as she gave him food, but he comes to understand that wasn't the case. What she did was amazing in his eyes, but only in his. She promised him more and more tasty food, a possible parallel to Denji and his habit of pursuing the hedonic treadmill, and so he takes her up on that. By eating her, he is coming full circle from the start of the series. He no longer wants for food in a shed that could hardly be called a home. He ends the series eating a hearty meal in an apartment of his very own. He is also putting the past behind him, moving past the part of his life when he places such value in food. He starts off his free life, the first time he ceases to be a dog, by eating the biggest feast of his life. If food represents the value of your life, how good you are living it, then is this not the best way for Denji to show how he has changed and what life he will now live? And another way to look at it is that by eating her, he is giving her the biggest show of his love possible. Denji loves food, and so he eats the woman he loves, turning her into food so he can properly show his respect and his gratitude for her. As the zombie devil says in chapter 1, as life is eat or be eaten, it's the natural way of life to one day be eaten yourself, and so Makima, unable to control the ways of nature, of life, ends up consumed, but not in the way she wanted, as once again she lost her control. She had no control over her death as Denji did it out of love, and love is the one thing she, the controlled devil, couldn't understand. Desiring more and more is natural. Denji comes to understand this in the controlled devil arc. He learns that his view of food, of life as a whole, was way too constrained, that he shouldn't feel bad for wanting more when he barely has anything to begin with. Part 1 is an exploration of Denji going from a dog to a human, of going from obedient to free, which is why his journey had to end with him eating, as dogs don't choose when to eat, they are fed, but humans, they do the cooking themselves. So I hope you now agree, even if you may think some of my points are a reach, that food is symbolic of Denji's journey as a person throughout part 1 of Chainsaw Man. And trust me when I say it doesn't end there, as I also believe part 2, the Academy Saga, once again carries on with the series' staple food symbolism. But before we get to part 2, I want to quickly mention how Chainsaw Man erases devils by eating them. This not only ties back into the zombie devil's line about true death coming when you are eaten, but also ties into the theme of ignorance. Chainsaw Man literally bestows ignorance on the world through the act of eating. Eating is an expression of life, but it is also an expression of death. Which is why, of course, Chainsaw Man is actually the death. Also, Denji eats a flower, which is such a random moment in the series, though if you want my take on it, I think the fact he takes a flower that was given out as thanks, basically an expression of feelings, and just eats it, says a lot about his views on feelings at that point in the series. He didn't understand love. He loved Makima because she provided him with a dream life, because she gave him food. Him eating the flower, a representation of a person's feelings then, is such a perfect metaphor for how he sees love and feelings, as he treats it as food in the same way he loves Makima for giving him food. Also, this scene comes directly after his and Makima's date, with him saying as he eats the flower,
I can also appreciate pretty things cause I got a heart.
He thinks he understands feelings and love since he just had a date, but he clearly doesn't, hence why he eats the flower instead of, not doing that. Because what he thinks is love between him and Makima to anybody else just seems strange. It's why by the end of the Bomb Devil arc, when he experiences a much purer form of love, yes, I do know Reze was also bamboozling him, but there were feelings there at least by the end of the arc, that he no longer eats flowers but holds them as they are intended to be. He has some ready for Reze, a bouquet to give to her, not to eat. He no longer eats flowers because he better understands relationships and feelings, of true feelings, behind gratitude for some grub. And of course, the fact Power thinks it's for her and that the owner literally says,
"You'll meet a girl who's right for you eventually,"
right before she storms in, is such amazing foreshadowing for how it is not Makima or Reze, but Power's love that ultimately is what he was always looking for. And side note, in this scene, Power finds Denji by smelling his scent, which is in complete contrast to how Denji ultimately defeats Makima, since she couldn't notice his smell because she never actually saw him as a person, whereas Power obviously does. Since it's her love that lets him overcome Makima's control and become free. The true love of a girl who just likes him as him wins out over the love of the girl who just wants to use him and chains him with the promises of food. And by love here, I don't strictly mean romantic love, and I think there's way more nuance to Denji and Power than just siblings or lovers, which I may dedicate a video to in the future. But back to the video, I hope you now see what I mean when I say food is deeply rooted into every aspect of the series. But okay, let's finally get on to part 2, and honestly, for most of the part so far, food hasn't been at the forefront. Sure, there's that cake scene and famine's existence, but for the most part food hasn't been brought to the forefront. All until the aquarium arc, where Denji eats some starfish. Him eating these starfish of Asa is the start of their relationship, where they specifically talk about their lives. Denji reveals how bad his life was and how he wants to make it better for Naota. Food acts as a medium over which they can convey their feelings. And then this idea gets ramped up to 11 with the introduction of the Falling Devil. I've already talked about how thematically perfect Falling is as an antagonist to Asa in this video here, but what I failed to address was how perfect she is for Denji too. As well, why is this devil that represents the fear of falling a chef? Because what do chefs do? What do we literally see Falling doing? They waste ingredients. They only use part of an ingredient and leave the rest where it is. In other words, they waste food, and that's something Denji, who appreciates the preciousness of food, who ate every last scrap of Makima out of love, cannot agree with. The fact a devil who sees no value in human life wastes food is so perfect, as food is symbolic of life. Then wasting food is the same as taking lives, all the more perfect when the food she is cooking is literally people. Denji throughout part 2, despite being framed as a hero, is never shown to be a selfless or heroic one. He does it for his own selfish reasons, very on brand, since becoming selfish, or more accurately, to have self-value, is one of the main lessons he learns in part 1. So the fact he attacks Falling not for killing people but for stealing apples is amazing. As remember, Denji values money, is a big part of his part 1 dream spiel, and in part 2 we see him be a human chair for money, or collect hats to sell them. He sees value in it and earning it, and so stealing to him is an absolute no-go, more so than mass murder it would seem, except when he actively steals in the aquarium arc, so maybe not. So perhaps to be a bit more favourable to Denji, he is thinking about the people who could eat those apples and wants to fight for their sakes, as Denji does care about people's lives even if he values a cat's over a person's, is why he gets so strung up on killing the dolls in the International Assassins arc. But until we get the full picture of Falling and her goal, it's quite hard to draw any definitive conclusions. Though I think Falling getting called a corn dog and being eaten by Denji is probs gonna amount to some level of symbolism. And although it's not food symbolism, chapter 127 just dropped at the time of me finishing up the script, so I do want to quickly say that this chapter really builds on Denji's development from part 1, with him basically monologuing how life is shit but having dreams give you hope and lets you get through it. Since, as I said already, he comes to understand that dreaming and inherently wanting more is not a bad thing, that sure, getting caught up in the hedonic treadmill will leave you eternally unsatisfied, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't dream, that it's all about a balance. He was left constantly dissatisfied as he accomplished more and more of his dreams, but that wasn't purely because dreams are unsatisfying, but more that he was trying to use them as a replacement for the love he felt from Prachita. It's only at the end of part 1, where he now has Naota to love and be loved by, that he can be satisfied with his dreams, that he can be happy while pursuing them, as he is no longer using them as a proxy for love, the thing that makes your life happy, but is using them as an extension of the already happy life he has, to hope even more and to find even more fulfillment in his life. Though in this case it's desire for not food, but sex, that's put on full display, linking back to how in part 1 he says the reason he wants to be Chainsaw Man, or in other words the reason he wants to live, is because he wants tons of sex. Basically he wants to live to be happy, and that happiness comes from both the love of those he cherishes and the unrestrained dreams he desires. And well, at the root of it, sex and food symbolically aren't all that different in Chainsaw Man, but I'll probably save that symbolism for another video. And well, let's not forget the lurking threat of famine, a devil that brings death by the absence of food, that takes life through a lack of food. I think it goes without saying that her thematic role in the rest of part 2 will be immense. Oh, and another thing, I didn't really know where to put this in the video, so I'm just going to shove it here near the end, is that the first two devils we see Denji fight in the series happen to be the tomato and marshmallow devils, which are obviously both food devils. I'm not really sure what the overall message of this is. It could be that, you know, he's literally fighting to survive, he's fighting just to eat, to put food on the table in order to live, by having to literally fight food devils. I think there is something there, I'm just not entirely sure what it is, but I thought I'd put it here at the end of the video just to cover all bases. In conclusion, I love food, probably not as much as Denji, but a lot, as it represents life. Good food makes your day, and bad food makes you want to puke. It might be a bit pretentious to call food a microcosm of life, but in Chainsaw Man it definitely is. And so I look forward to seeing what Denji ends up eating next, though hopefully it isn't another fully grown woman. I wrote that part before chapter 127 came out, so yes, Denji has now gone and eaten a grown woman. Never change, Denji, never change. And if you want to go the extra mile in supporting this channel, then consider pledging to my Patreon, where for as little as £2.75 a month, you can get your name at the end of the video, like Hikari Desu, 7SO, Ringjack9696, Dewey, and General Tonyos. So with all that said and done, I've been Seth the Sin, the Deadly Sin of Geek, and I'm signing out. Stay safe, everyone.